The humor is pretty hit or miss throughout the film, so it's a good thing this is more action-oriented and not so much of a comedy. It's actually not a bad story, and probably a better Bizarro-themed story than anything else put in a movie so far, which is kind of unfortunate, actually. Anyway, this has some good action, feels more like a Lego movie than a TT's Lego Batman, and I really like seeing the Bizarro versions of the entire Justice League. It's almost too bad this is a Lego movie, as the story in this film would be at least as good in a live-action format. Then again, Bizarro himself is just the right kind of silly to match a Lego style. Also, I thought they were setting up a fight between Batman and Superman the whole time, but I guess it was just a side story for Batman to learn how to trust other people. Because that's what Batman always has to learn in every movie. I actually think this is a very good film. Among all the DC animated films produced by CW, this is obviously the best one. It probably has one of the most interesting plots among any of the movies put out by DC thus far. Its voice acting isn't great, but it's half decent most of the time.
I'm gonna get you out of here.
Negative. Total failure imminent. You have to make sure my neural cortex is destroyed.
Your cortex is you, man.
The action and animation is also pretty good throughout. The problem, and the reason this film is so low in rank, is because it's bogged down by some pretty horrible dialogue throughout most of the movie.
Bar again? On a Wednesday? Hello, alcoholic?
He's here with his friends, just like you. If having superpowers doesn't build your confidence, nothing will.
It doesn't help that what they're talking about, more often than not, has more to do with the relationships between characters or Ray's love life, rather than this much more interesting super Nazi invasion from another dimension. This film's faults don't completely detract from this being a very enjoyable, action-packed movie, but it keeps distracting us from what is otherwise a very good film.
Ready our forces. Tell them to prepare a final strike. Once we find the base, we can eliminate the last of the resistance forces.
I actually like the first half hour of this movie better than the rest of the film. It's action-packed and exciting, with great special effects and cinematography, and an interesting story that doesn't meander on anything because they don't have any time for that before the planet blows up. Unfortunately, after this point, the plot suddenly slows down to a practical standstill until Zod shows up on Earth in the second half of the film. Up until then, it's mostly spending double duty on both Superman wondering about what type of Superman he wants to be, and on Lois Lane trying to prove to the world that aliens are real. Once Zod shows up and starts being an evil jerk, the movie gets pretty good again. This film is also plagued with some really bad writing. The best example is probably when Jonathan Kent sacrifices himself so Clark doesn't reveal he's Superman, which doesn't make any sense at all. This feels more like they shoehorned this in here so people would feel something about this character. Except at this point in the film, we've hardly seen any of Jonathan outside of him telling his son they should never use his powers ever, and that isn't enough weight for his death to matter. This isn't a tragic backstory, it's just stupid. This film does manage to ask a lot of big questions about what it takes to be a Superman, but I feel the answers to those questions are far from satisfying. This is a weird film. So weird, I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it. For one thing, nothing about it is ever truly bad. In fact, it has a lot of positives. It does a good job balancing its stories, though it does have a lot of side plots. None of them overshadow the main story of Red Hood setting the stage for Two-Face to then take over. This also does something that I think everyone should take note of, and that's that they combine the two main conflicting plot lines in a third act in a way that makes sense. Normally, if I see this in a movie, I'd probably say something like, blah blah blah, masterfully written, blah blah blah, but I guess that segues into this film's issues. This has the same problem as the Lego Shazam movie in that it's trying to be funny the entire time, but it just never quite gets there. Though Shazam was so unfunny it just sucked all the life out of the rest of the film, this somehow manages to never be funny, but also never be unfunny at the same time. I suppose it's best described as simply amusing, but only that. Here's an example. At one point, Batman needs a ride from a stranger who can't give up his ride because he has a personal emergency. So he takes Batman grocery shopping, though he makes Batman do the shopping. But then Batman forgot the ice cream.
Do you like that? Batman forgot the ice cream.
You see? At no point is there ever an actual joke. It's just an amusing situation. My other issue is that this is like a really dumbed down version of Batman in general. I'll exemplify this with how they use Red Hood in this film. Red Hood is Jason Todd, and he's angry at Batman in this movie because after he left, when he was younger, Batman acted like he didn't care. It has nothing to do with how the Joker killed him or anything, just that he left because he preferred video games to fighting crime. But he still did all this stuff to take over the city and kidnap the Bat family. It's just a weird plot point for an equally weird film. Dracula comes back, enslaves the Penguin, turns Joker into a vampire, and is trying to turn Vicky Vale into his undead bride.
You cannot win. No human can resist my will.
This is another movie that fails to execute one of its 3 acts properly. This time it's the second act. The initial setup is great, as is the finale when Batman confronts Dracula with the most one character versus another character in any movie with verses in the title. But the second act is mostly just a boring snooze fest as we wait for better things to happen.
And you, Stipes? Huh? I realize this assignment may not be as big a priority to you as catching your next wave, but would you mind tucking in your shirt?
Another thing that's only a minor complaint, but this film has a very cartoony style, which I think clashes with the supernatural horror elements of the film. There's one more issue with this film, and that's that it's trying to balance classic horror elements with comedy, and it mostly succeeds on the horror parts, but totally fails at the comedic elements. I think part of the problem is that Batman and Dracula by themselves aren't particularly funny. Most of the humor comes from the Joker and the Penguin. Not that their jokes are particularly funny. Still, the horror elements make this worth a watch. This film is all style over substance, though it does have quite a bit of that too. But that's also the problem.
That'd be egg on my face, Pathos. You know I don't like egg on my face.
It's all incredibly stylized, but the substance doesn't quite fit the Sin City-like cinematography, which makes something that's completely in contrast to itself. In fact, it becomes almost a parody of itself, along with a satire of superhero films in general. Unfortunately, I don't think those particular aspects are on purpose, and I believe it's more to emulate the style of 1940s radio programs.
I'm coming after you, Octopus, but before I kill you, you're gonna answer me some questions.
I do think it does a good job of that, but a few things are anachronistic for today's audiences. This movie has some good action throughout, and it's fairly entertaining despite the plot making less and less sense as the film goes along. Oh, I also appreciate this totally skips over an origin story, something I always want them to do in any superhero story personally. The problem with this movie is that it's just too damn long. And I don't mean like movies have a limit to how long they should be, but it's one thing to have a long movie, and it's another thing entirely to have a movie that's nearly 3 hours long and all you can see is all the unnecessary filler they use to pad out the runtime. It's kind of a tragedy too, because you can kind of see what could have been a pretty good film in between the scenes that should have been left on the cutting room floor. I mean, the stuff with Batman is great. The stuff with Bruce Wayne, not so much. The stuff with Catwoman and Bane is pretty awesome. The stuff with Talia al Ghul is as forgettable as her death scene is. Also, why did they have to shoehorn in that Batman has brittle bone disease now? He already had a pretty good reason to quit being Batman as he martyred himself in the last film, and Gotham City has been totally free of crime since then. So he doesn't even need to be Batman anymore. It's just weird to me they thought they needed this as a plot point as well. I've never seen any Teen Titans show, so maybe I'm missing the point of this movie to some degree. Anyway, this isn't bad. It gets straight into the action, which I appreciate, but it also doesn't explain anything, which I don't, especially since I don't know anything about the Teen Titans, as I just mentioned. Actually, I would say this is a really great movie with a solid plot line, a good mystery, great action, and animation, along with decent voice acting. There's some parts that I think are especially weird, but didn't detract from my enjoyment of the film. There's 2 problems holding this film back. The first is a major one, and that's that after they go to Tokyo, first they fight Godzilla. Okay, that part is awesome. But after that, the film does absolutely nothing for 20 minutes before it remembers it's supposed to have a plot again. It's weird. Cyborg eats a whole lot of food at no consequence. Beast Boy sings karaoke and learns nothing. Robin and Starfire talk about their relationship, but it's a non-starter. Raven chews gum. It's just strange, and I'm really not sure what the purpose of it was, other than to eat up runtime. The other problem is that almost none of the humor works, and the writers seem to think that being annoying equals being funny, which just isn't true. This has a more realistic feel than most of the cartoons on this list so far. In fact, it kind of feels like a mafia movie with superheroes in it than anything else. Though the mystery of who the Red Hood is about as complex at this point as figuring out that Bruce Wayne is Batman, or Nightwing is Dick Grayson, or the Joker is a bad example for this.
Need a hand?
No.
But since this is one of the few Batman cartoons that doesn't use the mystery as a driving force, and it's more about Batman confronting both his own feelings and the Robin he failed the most, this movie was actually very good.
A little louder, lamb chop.
Had some good twists and turns, and probably would have been higher on this list if it wasn't also so boring.
Lie to me again, and crashing into a wall head-on will be the least painful activity of your evening.
Not every scene, but it seemed like it would counter its semi-realistic action or interesting superhero and villain stuff with excessively long, boring monologues from various characters that never go anywhere, and other scenes of that nature. Also, this is one of those movies where the whole thing is building up to this big event, but they waste so much time getting there that by the time they do, I mostly don't care anymore. This makes up for it by having the most interesting stuff in the film during this time, but it has to win me back after all this random mediocrity. Also, this has nothing to do with complaints or compliments, but there's a scene where I legitimately thought for half a second that the Batjet took a shit on the Joker. You know, Joker, some people say it's good luck. This movie was weird. It's incredibly dry for one thing.
Hey, everything okay?
It is now.
Which makes it hard to feel anything, even when important action-packed stuff is happening. I think part of the problem is that every voice actor is about as deadpan as they can possibly be for most of the film's runtime.
Listen up. Our vigilante, or Batman, as the news shows are calling him, has committed 70 assaults in the past.
I think they were going for a much more dramatic tone than most Batman animated movies, but I'm guessing the director thought that the actors reading their lines like most reporters read the news was good enough to accomplish the tone they were going for.
You two, stop the car. Get out.
The hell?
Don't mind him. Probably hopped up on something.
This movie is elevated by having amazing animation, cinematography, a halfway decent story, and great sound design. I mean, just listen to this baseball bat fall on the ground. But these aren't enough to discount the sleepy-sounding voice acting. Another weird decision, the focus is almost entirely on Jim Gordon, which I was not expecting in a movie with Batman in the title. I'm completely guessing they switched the focus once they got Bryan Cranston as the future commissioner. It's hard to tell if this was the best decision, since the quality of the voice acting brings everything else in this film down by its very existence. There's some good stuff in this film though, but you'll note that stuff isn't the parts where dialogue is the focus.